Good morning, everybody. I'm going to just wait a couple minutes to give everyone a chance to log on that wants to log on to the live stream. I hope everyone is doing well. We're in the home stretch, so we're getting pretty close to our Easter break. So we've got today and then tomorrow and then Easter break. So I hope you all are excited and I hope you all have a great break. And I hope you all finish strong in the last couple of days we have before break. If you ever have any questions, even over break, email me. Just let me know. The chapter, and then tomorrow we are going to have our quiz on the chapter, and then obviously into break. So I just wanted to close this chapter out so that we could get into the break without having to review when we come back from the break. So I planned that out like that. All right, so just give it another minute or so, and then we'll get into the content. And we're going to be focusing mostly on today post-Civil Rights Act of '64 and forward, for the most part. All right, I'm getting an error message up here, so if there's any lag, I apologize. But everybody, just because the legislation changed didn't mean that racism wasn't still a thing. So racism still existed in the South, and it was still somewhat pervasive in the South. I mean, it existed in America, not just the South, but it was more, let's say, the pro-segregation, anti-civil rights people were more vocal in the South. One thing that really caused a lot of strife and division in the nation during this time period was the Watts riot. And this happened in 1965. And so Watts was a man who was beaten by police. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Rodney King riots. We will talk about the Rodney King riots. But the Rodney King riots are basically almost the exact same thing as the Watts riot. So the Watts riots, there were accusations of police brutality. It was a white officer who beat a black man, and so there were accusations of police brutality and racism. I don't really know that that was ever substantiated or wasn't substantiated, but the accusations were there. And generally, if there's enough bad feeling in the society, an accusation is enough to touch off issues, kind of like the Ferguson riots, where the police officer, but he was already tried and convicted in the media. So people read the news stories and the sensationalism. They figured he was just racist because he was a white cop, but the case exonerated him. But it didn't matter. The riots had already happened and were done because what the perception was enough to touch off rioting. But I'm not saying that's the case with the Watts riot. I'm just saying that that can be the case. So anyway, riots break, big rioting. And similar riots happened in various cities in America between '64 and '68. So there were race riots occurring. This was a time of strife and discontent and just instability in the nation. So in response to this, the Kerner Commission is formed, and you all did some questions on the Kerner Commission. And the focus is to figure out what is causing this urban violence. And the commission does a study, and the findings are that racism is to play and inequality is also in play in here. And so the recommendations of the commission were to push for inner city jobs. So better Lyndon Johnson, who received the result or findings of the commission, really never did anything with this. He had his own issues with Vietnam heating up in the international sphere, so he had his hands full, so he never really did anything. He's a more radical faction of the civil rights movement was the Black Power movement, which was an African American pride movement, and there were some violent factions and some non-violent factions in the Black Power movement. But it's like a more politicized version of the Harlem Renaissance. So if you remember the Harlem Renaissance we talked about in the 1920s, where it was a movement of African American pride. There's new music, new literature, new poetry, new art. And one person in the movement that was very prominent was Malcolm X. Now, Malcolm X was a man who was reformed after he was in prison. And he gets out of prison and he joins the Nation of Islam, which it's also referred to as Black Islam. It's not the same as Islam. It's a separatist movement in Islam. They believe in the Prophet Elijah Muhammad, and so not Muhammad, the Islamic prophet, but Elijah Muhammad, the Nation of Islam prophet. And there are other separatist doctrines in there. And Malcolm X was a very powerful figure in the civil rights movement, but he eventually breaks with the Nation of Islam and becomes just a regular Muslim. And and this people, and it makes people in the Nation of Islam angry at him so much so he's assassinated by a black Muslim, someone who is African American who belongs to the Nation of Islam, who felt that Malcolm X had sold out the Nation of Islam in the Black Power movement by becoming a moderate or regular Muslim. And so he's assassinated. And then also in April of 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is also assassinated. So two big figures in the civil rights movement are assassinated. And if you count Robert Kennedy, who had pushed for Latino rights also, he was also assassinated in 68. We have, yes, the Voting Rights Act of 65 is passed, but there's still a lot of racial tension in America. And there isn't a lot of heart change in the South, particularly, but among people who were for segregation in general in America, there's not a lot of attitude or heart change. It's going to take time for that to happen. Fortunately, we can see today that, to us, hopefully, that we look at segregation, we look at the racism, and we can't believe that that was what America was like less than 100 years ago, because that's how much society has changed. It's changed for the better. Because we've challenged those ideologies and philosophies that were detrimental to America and to people in America. All right, so that's it for today. I want to cut off early and give you time to study for your quiz. So if you're studying for your quiz, which you should be doing, just make sure you focus on major linchpin events in the civil rights movement. So I would be sure you know Brown versus Board of Education. Make sure you know Rosa Parks and the busing desegregation. Make sure you know Civil Rights Act of 64 and Voting Rights Act of 65. All right, any questions for me or any comments? All right, well, I'll send out the quiz email, and then otherwise, I hope you all have a great Easter break. Bye, guys.